I don't know what bothered me the most. The fact that I was a failure as a husband, or that I was a failure as a father. I don't know if I was depressed or just furious. To say the least, it was a bit confusing. I spent my entire life trying to improve my family's life, and all I ended up doing was providing them with things and money. It just doesn't work. It quickly became very clear that my only function was to fill the well. I loved my wife, and I loved my children. Please note that all of this is in the past tense. I have my own business. Terry Martin and I grew up together. We had been best friends since elementary school. Terry and I started the company right after finishing vocational school, and it grew faster than we could have imagined. So technically, I should say that we have our own business. A few years later, we both married our high school sweethearts. Life was good. For the first 15 years or so, everything was wonderful. The company was doing well. Terry and I both earned decent salaries, and we had more than 30 full-time employees. Terry and his wife Myra had 3 sons. Allison and I had twins, a boy and a girl. We both had modest-sized mansions in McMansion. We enjoyed dining out, pleasant vacations, and expensive cars. Terry and I were very business-oriented. Business came first. Early on, we understood that it was important for our clients to be satisfied, even if our employees were not. A third of our best workers were former convicts. We hired them directly from the prison vocational school. In 8 years, only 2 of the ex-cons turned out to be a problem, and the other ex-cons quickly took care of it. They were doing well and weren't about to let a few troublemakers ruin their lives. We supported several community programs and even sponsored a softball team. Unfortunately, my family life was also unfair. Somehow, my wife became socially active for several progressive causes. I wasn't thrilled about it, but she let me do my thing, so I let her do hers. Politics had never been a part of our family, but suddenly, we began talking about current events and political issues. I tried hard to avoid such discussions, but it was futile. The more I disconnected from her or ignored her, the more determined she became. It was like watching CNN and Fox News simultaneously. I started trying to avoid her, but it was difficult. As my wife and I grew distant, so did my relationship with my children. For many years, I tried to engage my son Jacob in various activities. I didn't care if it was sports, hiking, or hunting and fishing. All he wanted to do was play video games and, as I later found out, occasionally enjoy marijuana. All my efforts were rejected, and eventually, my wife told me to just leave him alone and mind my own business. I would have resisted more, but my son would smirk at me whenever she said that. My daughter Jordan was a clone of her mother. She used to be Daddy's little angel, but now she hardly recognized me as her father. I couldn't count all the piercings she had. Despite being on birth control, it didn't prevent her from contracting gonorrhea twice. She loved accompanying her mother to all sorts of political gatherings and social events, but wouldn't even consider going for ice cream or pizza with her dad. I also gave up trying to connect with her. One of the most serious downturns occurred when I refused to donate company money to one of her initiatives. They wanted to provide addicts with clean needles to prevent infections from shared or dirty ones. Allison didn't speak to me for a week. It was hard to imagine things could get any worse. The company's Christmas party was approaching. Terry and I insisted that Allison and Myrna take care of it. Myrna was more than happy to do so, but she had to drag Allison, kicking and screaming, to help her. In the past few months, Allison had been going out more and more often. She also went on overnight trips to participate in various progressive activities. I didn't know if they were protests, rallies, or seminars. It didn't matter. Jacob had moved from weed to pills. I didn't know what kind, but that didn't matter either. Jordan now had her own website with vlogs. Myrna did a great job with the Christmas party. She tried to share the credit with Allison, but Terry and I knew better. We had beer and wine, but no hard liquor. We had 100% employee participation. I think the annual bonuses had something to do with that. Allison and the kids were there, of course, but they didn't seem to enjoy it as much as everyone else. There were no social gatherings, but there was plenty of food. "John, I need to talk to you for a minute." Terry tried not to draw attention as we stepped aside. "What's the matter?" I tried to speak casually to calm him down. "Jorge Martinez needs to talk to you, but he's a bit worried. What do you mean? Well, he doesn't want to ruin the party and doesn't want to upset you, but he really feels there's something you need to know. Jorge was one of our ex-cons. He'd been with us for 6 years, and we didn't want to lose him. All right, bring him here. It's not going to be a problem, is it? Terry winced slightly. Jorge and his wife Elena looked a bit anxious. I smiled and tried to appear relaxed to put them at ease. Terry quietly left. Mr. Terrell, we don't want to cause any trouble, but when my wife saw your wife today, she felt she had to say something. I tried to talk her out of it, but she insisted. I looked at his wife and nodded, indicating she could continue. She glanced at Jorge, nudged him with her elbow, and gestured for him to speak. Elena works at the Hampton Inn. She's responsible for cleaning the 5th floor and has been working there for 2 years. Your wife and a certain Mr. Franklin have been using room 511 once or twice a week for the past year. They usually stay for only 2 to 3 hours and always in the same room. I was speechless. I had a million questions, but I didn't think this was the right time or place to ask them. Elena looked relieved that it was all out in the open, but Jorge was very anxious, not knowing how I would react. I just took his hand in both of mine, looked him in the eye, and said, "Thank you." I smiled at Elena and gestured for both of them to return to the party. Jorge relaxed. As I was leaving, I walked past Terry. Give Jorge a raise next month. Kyle Franklin was in charge of the city's parking department. I didn't know him very well, but I knew he had been a public servant for almost 20 years. He dreamed of running for mayor someday. He was married to Nora Franklin, the owner of one of the county's leading real estate firms. She was an attractive woman who loved placing her ads on the sides of city buses. I wondered if she had a special rate for that. That evening, my wife gave me a dressing down for leaving the party early. The kids weren't too happy either. I just smiled and returned to my reading. Mickey Spillane still read well after 70 years. On Monday morning, I comfortably awaited Nora Franklin's arrival at the Franklin real estate office. The secretary had prepared hot coffee, and I had brought along the big kill. She walked in around 10, stopped, and paused for a moment to look at me. I wondered when you'd show up, Mr. Terrell. It took you long enough. I followed her into her office and took my coffee with me. I suppose when you own the company, you can set your own hours. Why hadn't I thought of that? John. May I call you John? I nodded in approval. John, I'm not going to rehash all this drama. I just want to know what you plan to do. I have a lot of questions, and I don't want you to mess things up. This was not what I expected. I thought I was going to deliver a grand revelation. Boy, was I wrong. Miss Franklin, it seems I'm quite behind in this matter. I didn't even realize it myself. A friend just told me. I have no idea what to do next, and I have no one to confide in or discuss this with. To be honest, I thought you were in the dark just like me. John, I've known about this for more than 6 months. I probably should have contacted you sooner, but I had a lot on my plate, and I didn't want you to mess everything up by doing something rash. Oh, by the way, call me Nora. What do you mean by something rash? Oh, you know. Like playing Rambo with Kyle in public. Maybe exposing them in some awkward manner. It's hard to predict what you macho men will do when something like this happens. I think it will be much more effective if you approach this calmly. I never considered myself macho. Well, anyway, what are your plans? How can I help you? I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. I think we're going to need more time. Over the next 2 weeks, Nora Franklin and I became good friends. In the past few months, Nora had systematically set her husband up. The IRS was very interested in his taxes. Nora had carefully kept her personal and business taxes separate from his. The state prosecutor was investigating how he redirected state funds intended for road construction and transportation to other, unspecified projects. The city was looking into his use of municipal funds to pay for motel rentals and restaurant bills. What made this really interesting was that she managed to get all of them to cooperate in their investigations, so they all converged around the same time. However, none of these efforts helped my situation in any way. Nevertheless, she made an interesting deal to sell her real estate business. I might be able to do something similar. My biggest problem was my home and family. I no longer had close relationships with my wife or any of my children. I really didn't want to leave the business, but it was necessary. Nora had a solution. About a month later, I announced that we were going to move to a new house. Allison's ears perked up, but all I heard from the kids was groaning. They liked our house. Jordan got interested when I mentioned the pool, and Jacob thought the 3-car garage might be cool. The trip to see the new house went well. It was twice the size of our current one and cost more than twice as much. Each of the kids had their own bathroom. Allison commented that we didn't have enough furniture to properly furnish the new place, but she seemed pleased when I told her she could buy all new things. She liked the professional kitchen. To top it all off, I told them we would all have new cars. For the first time in many years, I was a great father and husband. Nora did a great job finding me a new home. It took her only 2 days to prepare all the paperwork. When I told Allison that Franklin Real Estate was handling the deal for us, she winced a little, but then seemed to accept it. Nora already had a cash buyer for our old house. I thought it was interesting to see my wife and my wife's lover's wife sitting at the same table to sign the documents. There were no fake pleasantries. We just sat down and got to work on the paperwork. The first stack to sign was for the sale of the old house. Allison and I both signed everything as presented by Nora, and then we had it notarized. We made $450,000 from the sale and transferred it to an electronic account. Allison felt pretty good and didn't pay much attention. She just signed. Next were the documents for the new house. Allison smiled when Nora mentioned the price was $900,000. She smiled again when I mentioned that I was putting the new house in her name for tax purposes. She thought it was a great idea. However, what she didn't notice was that it wasn't a purchase contract but an option to purchase. If she had read the fine print, she would have seen that the option was for 120 days. If the actual purchase wasn't made by then, the price would revert to $1 million, and the $40,000 option fee would be forfeited. I didn't want to lose money, but in the long run, it was worth it. After everything was signed and notarized, Nora handed her the keys to her new house and congratulated her. It seemed sincere, and I could barely keep myself from laughing. Allison was fuming the whole way home. She hadn't expected me to actually put the house in her name. She also didn't expect to receive a $10,000 gift card from our local upscale furniture store. Sometimes you have to spend money to make money. The next day was car day. Jacob chose a Mustang, as I expected. Jordan surprised us all by picking a lime green Kia Soul. Allison chose a white Lexus. I explained to both kids the importance of establishing a credit line. They seemed to understand, which made it easier to put both cars in their names and, of course, fully finance them. What they didn't think about was that someone would have to pay for the cars. I did the same with Allison's new Lexus. I insured each of the new cars for 90 days. The total out-of-pocket expense for all 3 cars was just under $600. Most of that went towards tags and titles. Another good investment on my part. A week later, we all moved into our new home. The more Nora and I worked together, the closer we became. We met every day. Sometimes I helped her with a project, and sometimes she helped me. It seemed we were getting very comfortable with each other. Terry was handling our welding business, and Nora had enough staff to run the real estate office. All our efforts were focused on ending our marriages. Nora planned to wait until Kyle was charged by one of the organizations investigating him. She didn't know who would get to him first. She seemed to think it didn't matter. My situation was a bit different. At some point, I decided that I didn't want a divorce. I had too much to lose, but I knew I had to do something. I just wanted it all to be over as quickly as possible. Nora came to the rescue again. John, have you ever been to Aruba? Only as a port of call while on a cruise, but I've never stayed there. Did you like it? I wasn't there long enough to decide. Why do you ask? I have the opportunity to buy a condo in West Oranjestad for $1 million. Would you be interested in something like that? That might be a bit tricky for me. I probably don't need anything that complicated. I thought we could go halves. I'm sure you could manage it. I'm sure I could, but you have enough strength to handle it on your own. Why did you even think of including me in something like this? Consider it a partnership, an investment, so to speak. I fancy myself a savvy businesswoman. I like using other people's money And besides, I enjoy your company. This piqued my interest. $500,000 will give me a buy-in? I'll prepare the paperwork. You know there will be paperwork, right? Absolutely. I found it surprising that I agreed to live with a woman I hadn't even had sex with. Now, I was even more excited about the whole project. Terry and Myrna were fully aware of my issues with Allison and the kids. They were ready to help in any way they could without being intrusive. Terry, I've decided I want to sell my half of the business to you and Myrna. That's really nice, John, but there's no way we could afford to buy out your share. I'd love to, but you know it's impossible. How does $1,000 sound? Care to explain? Terry, you don't need my help running the business. We both know that it's almost running itself at this point. I'm leaving soon, and it will all fall on your shoulders. You'll be the sole owner and make all the decisions. All you need to do is call me occasionally for advice. Aha, I see, said the blind man. And I suppose there will be a consultation fee attached to this phone call? Terry said, smiling. Think of it as a kind of lifetime annuity. Don't worry too much about it. Just make things easier for yourself. The company lawyer prepared all the necessary paperwork. Terry and Myrna were a bit concerned that I might be overreacting, but I assured them I had everything under control. It's nice to have a friend you can trust. It seems funny, but I never bothered to verify Allison's affair with Kyle. I never felt the need to obtain compromising photos, emails, or phone messages. I wouldn't have needed them. I wasn't planning on getting a divorce. I was going to do what 21% of deadbeat dads do, just leave. 2 weeks later, Kyle Franklin was arrested. I don't even know who got the awards. He wasn't a big-time crook or embezzler. He was just a petty civil servant who dipped into others' pockets too often and messed around with my wife. Nora and I had long parted ways before all the dirt came out. She sold her company along with 32 rental properties and 3 apartment buildings. She was set on a new life. I was her designated boy toy. That's how she referred to me, and I didn't find it offensive. We really managed to solidify our relationship after arriving in Aruba, but we never went through any courtship stage. It was as if everything had been prearranged. I didn't miss my kids. Does that make me a bad father? Given the circumstances, I don't think so. I didn't miss my wife. Does that make me a bad husband? I don't think so. Nora became an avid golfer. She tried to get me interested, but there was no spark. She had a steady group of women she played with 3 days a week. We met with them and about a dozen other former players a few times a week to socialize. I adapted to this very quickly. It was a new carefree lifestyle, and it was truly enjoyable. I decided to take up painting to fill my time. I had always wanted to do it. Every morning, I would go down to the docks and set up my easel. I wasn't very good at it. I would come back to the apartment later, and the first thing I'd do was scrape all the paint off the canvas to start fresh the next day. 3 months had passed, and I still had nothing to show for it. Nora found it quite amusing. I avoided contact with anyone, but I felt I should call Terry. John, it's about time. I was starting to lose faith in you. Are you settled in? Settled in and feeling better than ever. It was the best decision I ever made. For the next 10 minutes, Terry and I chatted about my new life in Aruba. I had no trouble convincing Terry to bring Myrna here for a week or 2. Things were going well. Terry apologized for not sending any consultation checks, but I had forgotten to give him an address or bank account number. I didn't need the money anyway. Terry, I hate to bring this up, but could you tell me about my wife and family situation? I don't know everything, but I'll tell you what I can. It seems things aren't going well without you. First off, Jacob was arrested. They caught him with 3 kilograms of fentanyl in his car's trunk. The car, of course, was confiscated, and since he was over 18, he was locked up. Allison couldn't bail him out. That's all I know about that. That's sad to hear. I know I'm his father, but honestly, I really don't care what happens to him. I tried and I failed. Jordan's situation isn't much better. Shortly after moving into the new house, she doubled her activity on her website. From what I've heard, she gained a lot of followers, and then one day, she told her mother she was going to California to meet some producer guy. 2 weeks later, they found her Kia abandoned in Memphis. Allison hasn't heard anything from her or about her since. I take it you get most of this information from Allison? Yes. She regularly comes to the office, hoping to catch you. I can tell she doesn't believe me when I say you're gone. She was furious last week when she received the notice that she needed to finalize the option on the house or vacate it by the end of the month. Very clever, John. She was completely bewildered. Right now, I don't know what her intentions are. I think some utilities have been cut off. She couldn't even afford to pay the electric bill. Did you help her? Don't be mad, John. I gave her $1,000 and told her to use it as a deposit for an apartment. I'm sure she'll spend it on something else. Myrna felt sorry for her. I chuckled a bit. All right, Terry, I understand. Just deduct it from my next payment. By the way, can't her lover help her? Now Terry laughed. He's in worse shape than she is. All I know is what we see on TV. There's nothing known about him right now, but spicy details pop up from time to time. I think he's going away for a while. Oh, and before I forget, Allison's car was repossessed. Since all her credit cards are invalid, she can't even use a taxi. I don't know how she's getting around. We chatted a bit more about business. Preliminary plans were made for an upcoming vacation in Aruba. It was a good conversation. I enrolled in an online painting course with a guy in the UK. 2 months later, one of the guys at the dock asked me to paint his sailboat. Nora worries that I might cut off my ear. Life goes on,